I wanted to start by just to give a kind of direction of what I want to talk about to like two examples which for me shows these kind of rules and convection. And one would be by saying like, if Magritte was alive today, would he be still doing the same stuff that he did 50 years ago? And for my sense, he wouldn't, because knowing what kind of stuff he would he's busy with, I think he would be using video quite easily, because he likes reality. He likes to mix that. And another example is I have this private fantasy, which, I hope one day I'll find some, well, I hope I never find the truth behind it. That would be boring. But I have this fantasy that in the 15th century, there was this Italian painter. Now I know he lives in Florence, or he lived in Florence, and he painted the Black Square of Malevich, but that was in the 15th century. But when he did that, first they burned the painting and then they kill him because they think he's totally insane. So, but does it mean that this painting exists or not? Because he did, you could say he did that painting, but today we have no recollection of it, or we have no proof of it. And why for me this argument is important is to show that our definition of existence, of something that exists, is not in itself in the thing, but it's in relation with other things. So that because we have no proof of this person existing, or of this painting existing, then it doesn't exist. But it could have existed, So where do you basically draw the line between something that exists and doesn't exist, Is it like, you could say, well, a friend of his saw the painting. Well, I'm sorry, but his friend is also dead and he never wrote to anybody. It's like, so is it one person, 10%, 20 people? And I think for me that's a good example of how important you do have like the work, your work, but also the existence of your work is dependent on the context, on the relation to the things that is outside of it. And so these two examples are more or less the line of thought that I want to talk about. Personally, I started making my work around 15 years ago, and my brother, who's 3 years older than me, first went to art school. So he brought his work home, and then I looked at it, I liked it, and I started making it myself. So for me, it would always be a question, am I an artist because I wanted to, or because he brought the stuff home? That's what I'll never know. But I guess if he stopped doing it and I'm still doing it, so I guess that kind of answers it. Anyway, so at the beginning, that was to my advantage because, the son or the daughter going to art school, it's like you don't do that because you won't win any money, you'll end up in the gutter or under a bridge. So he went first, so I was lucky because then it was easier for me to go in after. But then after 2 years of university, he quit. He quits. So then my mother comes to me and says, look at your brother, look at what he's doing now. He has no money, be careful, stuff like that. So that was the other side. But, beside that, so I started to do my work and things like that. But for some reason, for, my education or whatnot, my first official art class, I sat there, and in my head, I just said, I have nothing to say. So that's how I started art school, with just like a blank thing. And, so I kind of went on through the years going through the motion of making art, but still having this kind of empty feeling, or, I was not expressing myself, I was just making art and stuff like that. So, and that went on for years. My work changed in different directions. And I guess it's when I went to Holland, when I finally took so much distance from my education, from my schooling, from the culture here, that I could break this kind of anonymous feeling about art, or me being outside of it. And that's when I started to become aware that if I was able to function for so many years without having my heart in it in a way, or very hidden, You know, it must be because I was following some rules or a very strong system, you know, because it didn't depend on me anymore. I was just following the rules, and I was able to function. And I think that was like one of the first realization about, you know, what is this background that I have? What are all these rules and these conventions, you know? So for years, I always was, you know, I was making drawings, paintings, and sculpture. And in Holland, one of the first things I did was to question a drawing for a drawing and a painting for a painting, which is something I've never done before. I just accepted that a painting was a painting, you know. And then around that time, I came with the idea, which I think I'll make one day as a performance, because I just like it. It's that why not maybe that the best way to make a drawing with a pencil is to try to punch a hole in a stone, you know. And all these years we've been doing the wrong way with thinking that it's about taking the pencil on the wall or on a piece of paper. But after all, you're supposed to take a pencil and make a hole in a stone, you know. I don't know any better, but why not, you know? I think that I also got that at one point from a lecture from, yeah, I forget now. God, it's time for coffee. Yeah, okay. And it's not, well, from a lecture from Dubuffet. Well, the lecturer was Jürgen Partenheimer, who was a teacher in the academy. And in his small lecture, he quoted Jean Dubuffet, who was like in the 50s French and worked with the naïf and the insane, art brut and stuff like that. And at one point, you know, he said something like, you know, it's like for the last 2,000-3,000 years, you know, since the Greeks started to put little figures on their pots, they made a mistake. You know, and since the last 3,000 years, we keep repeating that mistake, that art is about making little figures and representing life, you know, so. But it's not because we made that mistake 3,000 years ago that we have to keep on repeating it today, you know, and so on. And I think this kind of reflects away my, a bit my, well, a lot actually, my way of looking at things, you know, it's like, I mean, I think, I mean, in a social way, you know, it's like the same thing I can say about South Africa. You know, it's not because apartheid exists today that it's a reason why it should continue to exist. You know, it's not because you goofed. You know, at one point you have to stop and admit that you're making a mistake and kind of stop over, you know, and start again. So, and I think maybe that's what is finally happening with art now. Because 100 years ago, you know, we were, I think for me the big change came with photography. Because with photography, art didn't need to be representative anymore, you know, because it was just, you just take a snapshot and you have reality in front of you. So art kind of became free then, and since then it's been trying to do, you know, a lot of things. My view of art history, I see the development in art history as a Y shape kind of thing, that art had its natural growth, its natural process until the 1960s, 70s, where art started, you know, with Dada and abstraction, and finally to the point where you had land art, environmental art, performance art, you know. And for me, what I say is that art finally, in a way, freed itself from the boundaries, you know. But the problem with that is that you could no longer buy art, and you could no longer own it. And that's when society felt fucked, you know. It's like, hey, this is wrong here, you know, because art was happening outside museum, outside of galleries. There was a big confusion about what was art and what was not art. So for me, in the 70s, you know, all these neo movement, you know, is just a direct result of that. You know, they needed to have possessions back so they could make money or make museums or whatnot. You know, so then you have all the neo-figurative and neo-geometric and all these neo stuff, and you know, then you have postmodernists, which is, well, art is dead. Yeah, well, then let's make art about art being dead, and we can still make money out of it. So for me, it's like everything went fine until the 60s, and I think if I bring it up, it's also in a way to show what these rules and conventions, how much they fuck up the natural growth of things, you know, because it didn't fit anymore in the society's definition of an artwork, which is something you possess, you sell, and you can exhibit. So at that point, they kind of, you know, took over again, and today I think today it's a kind of very confused situation of art. Anyway, so becoming aware of all these things, becoming aware of all these rules and stuff like that, I think the first convention, the first rule I feel I became aware of was this very strong belief in objectivity. And objectivity then is used like a ruler, which means like this is the truth, this is there. So as long as you have this belief in this thing called objectivity, then you could always, you know, bring the ruler and measure you. And it's like, if you're the right height, then you're good, and if you're not in the right height, then you're bad, you know. But personally, I don't, you know, for a reason I'm going to talk about now, I don't believe in objectivity. I believe it's impossible to get any objectivity, you know. Art history or the school, in art school, the way I was taught was about, I learned technique, I learned the golden rule of composition, I learned the right way to make art. And in the same way that art history was more about who did what, when, than why they were doing it anyway. So it was always everything was kind of so much structured. So how do I relate this to objectivity? Well, I think the first connection I make is that how do we view art, or actually how do we view anything, but I keep it to art at this point. So I get into the concept of interpretation now. First of all, when you interpret something, there's two things. There's you and there's the thing that you are interpreting. Now, the thing that you want to talk about exists in a certain context. And as the context change, so will the object will change. So, by example, if you want to talk about, you know, a piece of art, whatever, and you're in a classroom situation with a teacher, what you are going to say most likely is going to be different than if you're, you know, with your best friend in a museum. And it's going to be different if you view a piece somewhere in Timbuktu in a small museum, you know. So that the things that you see are actually influenced by the context in which they are. These things are not separated. The same thing, you know, so that's like the outside thing. The object, you know, if the art object is a gift from a friend, you're going to react different to it than if it's something, I don't know, something your mother bought, and then you have to be nice because you like your mother, or you want a cake from her or something. Or, you know, or if it's a word from somebody you actually don't like, personally. You know, so all these things will affect your evaluation of the work. You know, so at this point, to talk about objectivity, it is for me a bit difficult. Then I will talk about the inside context, and the inside context is your frame of mind, what is happening in there. And by that, you know, the first obvious thing is how many books you've read, how many courses you had, how much knowledge you possess, and the quantity of knowledge you possess will affect whatever you're going to say out there. And, you know, none of us has the same background, the same education, the same mind filling. So it's very hard to imagine that the person next to me is going to have the same amount of information to talk about what is there. And just, you know, again, I go back to Malevich because I like his stuff, you know, the black square. And, you know, it's the same thing. And if you see, you know, the 1915 black square of Malevich, you know, you can say, wow, it's nice. You know, if you see a black square done by Joe Schmo in 1968, you're going to say, well, you know, Malevich did it 40 years ago, so why should I look at this date? You know? But if you find one that's done in 1815, it's like, wow, you know. But this is just knowledge, and that's how much this knowledge of art history is going to affect you. And another way that you're also affected, you know, it's like if you have a hangover from the other night, if you would rather be on the beach instead of in this stupid museum or in this stupid class, you know. What other reason? I'm sure there's thousands, you know. It's like if you'd rather be working in your studio and listening to, I don't know, what did I hear yesterday? I did It My Way by the Sex Pistols. It's a nice one. So, I mean, all these things, you know, they all affect how you're going to look at things. I mean, come on, if you want to go to the toilet, you know, so you're going to talk very fast about what's in front of you. So, you know, giving these things, you know, like already it's out there, it's hard enough to control all the situation. And inside yourself, even trying to get an idea straight, you know, it's almost impossible. Well, that's not only it's impossible, but it belongs to you. It belongs to whatever your frame of mind is, you know. So I don't really understand where they take this concept of objectivity when we're just influenced by everything, you know, inside us and outside of us also. So, then it's the same thing, you know. We would like to think that we open our mouth and then we can come up with these objective comments. That you know, it's not to say we're intelligent, but it's, you know, we would like to sit and relax and to think, okay, and there we go, you know, make a nice thing. So then what do we do about, what do I do with what we call memory, or this kind of information, black and white information? Now, the thing about that is that, for me, like I say, everything out there is subjective, because everything is related to the environment in which it's sit in, and also yourself, how you see it. So, the way I see it is that any information you're going to take from outside is subjective. So how does this thing suddenly becomes objective when it enters your brain, and suddenly becomes objective, and then suddenly you're able to make it objective also at the same time? You know, for me it's like, if you still want to believe in objectivity, then I have to say, well, all your objective thinking is based on totally subjective things. So if you can tell me how you can make something objective of everything subjective, you know, well, I'd like that. Maybe I can sleep better or something. So, now, if I get back to the idea of you know, the truth, you know, which is most often what people like to use, you know, it's like be rational, you know, be logical, be objective, you know, it's like, this is so obvious, this is the truth. What do I say here about the truth? A truth which is universal to everyone and is beyond any moral, emotional, or ethical influence. You know? But these truths, like I say, well, I'm sorry, but they come out of subjectivity, and everything is related and subjective around you. So I still, you know, if it's the same thing, how can you find any objective truth when you're in a world which is, you know, totally changing and totally related to each other? So my answer to that is that an objective truth is only objective to itself, which another way to say is like, I say what I say because what I say is what I say. You know, it's like an objective truth can only be objective in regards to itself. But the funny thing about that is that if you go inside your head, and even you want to look at your objective truth, well, just you by looking at it, you're making it subjective. Because when you judge yourself, or when you look at yourself, you use the baggage, you use the mood, you use the context in which you are. So even this objective truth, if it does exist, you know, we cannot even look at it, we cannot even grasp it, because the moment we try to look at it, or to write it, or to do anything with it, it becomes subjective again. You know, so for me, it's just I see this society based, you know, around me, which is based on, you know, everything strict rules, morals, etiquette, ethics, and stuff like that. Well, actually, for me, there doesn't exist any base for that. It's just I call it just an illusion, the subjectivity. So to kind of summarize this point, it's like to say that any perception of what is around me will be subjective. Any transmission, what I say, will also be subjective, and any perception of my perception will also be subjective. So for me, there's no way out of it. Everything is subjective. So not how to deal with that, but for me the only way, if we cannot reach a subjective truth, then the only way for me to find something to center you around is, for me, is what I call the gut feeling, which is just trusting your instinct. Because when you trust your instinct, you're not rationalizing them or making them logical. You just kind of follow a feeling without grasping it, At least that's what I try to do. Because most of the time, as soon as you grasp it, you try to explain it or give it a reason, which most of the time proves to be wrong. If you left it alone, everything would be fine. If you try to change it or act on it in an intellectual way, it basically goes wrong. So for me, the only perception of an objectivity is, to kind of set up an open channels towards your feeling, towards your instinct, towards your intuition. And it's like, there's lots of, I like Proverbs. Proverb is my fascination. If I ever have time, which means when I'll be rich. I have this thing, I say that we're going to learn much more about the world around us if instead of building multi-million particle accelerator, we just look at the Proverbs and read at the Proverbs. Or the myths, anything like that. So each time I'm kind of not really struggling, but have doubts or things like that, I always open my book of Proverbs, just look to see if there's anything that can, it's like, anyway, these guys are dead and they thought of it a long time ago, so most likely they're much wiser than me. So so then about this thing about trusting your inner feeling, and you just have to look at Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. So it's like takes the things up, like trust the Force. How was his name? David Gilmour? Trust the Force, or be true to yourself. Listen to your feelings. There's only one truth, and that is the one you possess. There's thousands of saying, about keeping away from the outside and just trusting what is happening. So now, why are we so convinced that there is this objective world out there? So I go to somebody that everything is subjective. Well, most likely you won't care. As long as there's hamburger and stuff, you'll be fine. But I mean, why are we so much under the belief that there's an objective reality out there, that there's a world out there? Well, the first basic common building stone for that is that if I share, it's a question of sharing unspoken rules, unspoken convictions. So if I'm with somebody of my own culture and we have the same kind of neighborhood and stuff like that, or just basic culture, then we have learned the same thing. So if something happened, we'll more or less come to the same conclusion. But that's because we share the same things, and not because there's an objective truth. Now, an example very simple about that is simple example is a book. You just take a book, and you put it on the table. You get somebody else, and you say, "Is this a book?" Yes, this is a book. So this is an objective truth because we both agree this is a book. But that's like very superficial. What if you dig a bit deeper? You say, well, is it a big book or a small book? Is it clean or dirty? Is it used or is it new? Then you might more or less still agree. But if you go on and still deeper in what is in front of you, it's like, is it, is this a a masterpiece, or is this garbage? Should we burn it, or should we frame it? Or should we have paperback edition very cheap? Then you most likely there's a chance you're going to start to get a fight. So it's like as long as we keep things just on the surface, we're going to believe that we're all objective and we're all thinking the same thing. But if we just take the time just to go a bit deeper, then it starts to get obvious that actually everybody thinks totally differently, that we don't have the same vision of the same thing. One example, which for me really hits the point, just for example, if I say the word mother, the image that's in my head and the feeling that's in my head will be totally different than from anybody in this room, because my perception of my education and of my mother is something unique. It's a very close relationship and whatnot. But as long as we're all from the same culture, more or less all the same generation and things like that, we're going to be able to kind of agree or think that we're all saying the same thing, but actually we're not saying the same thing. So then, if we are not thinking the same thing, if we're all different in that way, then what happens when we try to talk to each other, to kind of reach a consensus? It's like the subjectivity is good because it's like a general agreement, but it's like a general agreement, but everybody forgot the rules about these things. So for me, as long as we keep this objectivity thing, we'll always be splitting things between good and bad, and better and worse, and things like that. So the way I see it, because for myself, I see this unavoidable subjectivity, and I see it as a richness that everybody is different, then that when two people meet and we talk about, let's say, an artwork or anything like that, I think it's much more clear if we just say, well, we're just comparing our way of thinking, we're just comparing our way of analyzing, or of perception, or whatnot, instead of being busy, I'm right and you're wrong, I'm better and you're not so good. For me, it's like any meeting with any other person is a meeting with a totally different universe, a totally different way of thinking. And I think in any case it's more positive to share or to give a certain comprehension to the beauty of another world than to actually say mine is better and yours is wrong. I think there's a writer, I think it's Marcel Proust, I heard it one time on the radio or something. He said that it's a beautiful trip to go around the world and to see other things, but he said but the most beautiful thing would be able to go into somebody else's head and visit his own world. And I think that says a lot into that we're all close to each other, but with this belief in objectivity and kind of being scared of our differences, then we're just keeping things apart. And so then, so the concept of one thing being better than the other one, stuff like that, when we have this objective world, that is around there, can be interpreted in another way, which is that something is not better in itself, but it is better adapted to the use you have for it. So then you don't talk about good or bad anymore, but you talk about the relation between the thing and the use it's supposed to have. So, in the sense of having elements, functions, correspond, so a situation in the thing. A good example of that is a car is adapted for, a small adult, 18 and up, stuff like that. If you put a baby in the car, if you put a dog in the car, that won't work. So the human being is better adapted to the use of the car. So this goes into about the interplay between how you deal with things is basically how you see them in relation to what you need of them. So when two things share some common, not necessarily uses, but that they're made to function with each other, then I don't know. Adaptation is not equivalent to objectivity, only to partly share subjectivity. Objectivity is only an illusion formed out of unspoken conventions, such as cultural, moral, ethical, political, that is passed down to us in our lifelong education. Anyway, what I wanted to say at this point was that our relation to things is in relation to what we need of them. So you cannot use an objectivity to say this is good, this is bad, but you can say I can use this or I cannot use this. This corresponds to what I need of it, and this doesn't correspond to what I need of it, which is different from saying it's good or it's bad. When one tries to interpret an artwork, he is in effect doing the same thing. He's looking how many correspondence exist between him and the thing out there. He's looking how much does the thing out there corresponds to my definition of what an artwork is. So you have like these conventions, these rules in your head about what an artwork should be. So when you go around, if you meet something that shares some of these conventions, then you can call it an artwork. If you walk around and the thing that's in front of you doesn't correspond to this grid, to these rules you have in your head, then you won't call it an artwork. So that's why it's important for me is that you looking at artwork or just life, I mean, this has nothing to do with art in a sense, but how you evaluate, is like there's this process of evaluation between what is there and what is inside you and what you need from it. So what I mean by that is that the artwork, or as last week I was speaking about meaning, comes out of the relation between there and you. So you cannot talk about the artwork being out there because it is not out there, because you look at it and the rules you have in your head decides if it's an artwork or not. So the artwork is actually a relationship between you and what's there. It's impossible for you to, and that's the point, it's like be objective, but being objective is totally impossible. So your interpretation or the thing that you see is in direct relation with who you are, and it's not something out there separated of you. You actually create the thing that is out there. That's why for me, for my personal work, I say I'm as much as a viewer as anybody who comes to the gallery and sees the works themselves, because my interpretation is as valid as anybody else, and as valid as anybody else's interpretation. Most likely it will be different, because I'm not the same person as the guy next door. But it is no reason to say I possess an objectivity, and everything you do is going to be compared to my objectivity, because there is no objectivity. There's only my point of view, and there's everybody's point of view. And I think that's why it's important to see this connection, this state, I would call it, between you and the artwork. That the artwork is not something existing out there, but it's something that you make yourself in your own words, in the same way that who you are is dependent on the environment. It's a two-way thing. So, conventions. Now, some of these rules or convention I've been getting towards so far, that you have in your head, and that you use to capture, to imprint what is in front of you. This is what, these are some I have here, and I'm sure you could add more to that, but I've kind of just selected a few. So some of these rules, the first thing I did is I just took away any idea of style or technique or content, all these things, because for me that's like, I'd be busy to compare, like with the Pepsi test, or, with the Oxidol against all, like which one was whiter than the other one. I found myself so many times, and well, not so many, at least in Holland, it's there, with art historians. Now, art historians can be okay, but my personal experience with art historians is most of the time they try to fit me into art history, as opposed to look what's in front of them. They just say, well, you're influenced by this, you're part of this, you're part of that movement, and you're doing this, you're doing that. And then I could say, well, yeah, but can you see what's there? And most of the time it's, anyway. So in some of the kind of group discussion to which I took part, like there would be this talk about, yeah, this person is doing it in this way, and no, he's doing it in that way, and I just feel it's just going round and round and round, and nothing gets done. It's like everybody says its word. If somebody says something that the other one likes, it's like applauded, and everybody's happy and has a big smile. That's the mutual scratch my back society. So, anyway, so the way I see it is that I wanted to go behind the scene, behind these typical going around things. So let's say that the first convention or rule or mythology about art, actually I kind of stepped over it by accident, from a friend of mine. But the first thing that defines if it's art or not is what I call the act of contemplation, which means stopping, standing still, and looking at the damn thing there. It's just like, okay, you're art, so I look at you. And why, I got this idea because I was talking to a friend, I don't know, I think we're talking about culture museums, things like that. Or I know it was a red dress that her mother made. And I think I was something, it could be art, this dress, because it was so, I didn't see it, but I think she was saying how beautiful it was and how careful and so well done, and I said, well, it could be art, if it's so beautiful, it's so well done, so we kind of, got into a small argument, and I said, well, all you have to do is just look at, put it on the wall and look at it. And then you're going to see its beauty. Take the time to look at it, and that's when I got the idea that the major definition of what an artwork is just the act of looking at it. It's just getting in front of it and looking at it. But if we stay at that level, there's other things that fit in that, and one of them is religion, which is also the same thing, contemplation, looking at nature, or whichever you like to do and meditate, that still fits in there. Or looking into your lover's eyes and losing feeling of time. Or also music. Music is the same thing. You just sit still sometimes, and you just let yourself taken away by it. But already, if you start with the act of contemplation, I feel that most of our daily routine is already like out of the way. Daily, you have to run, you have to make money, you have to catch your bus and bake your bread. So, then the second convention, which defines a piece of art, is just the simple idea that it must have a body, it must have a visual body. That's where religion and music gets thrown out. So you must have this thing, this object, and the love for object I find is today still the big problem. You know, when I told you about the Y cross, you know, and the return to objects and museum and that kind of stuff, then for me it's that, you know, it's that this concept of owning thing, of having thing, is so important. So an artwork must also have, you know, you must see it with your eyes, and you must be able to touch it when the guard is not there, and you know, just know that it's there in front of you. But you know, this concept, like when I talk about the 60s, gets a bit more difficult because with, you know, kinetic art and conceptual art and environment and performance and video. So in the last years, this kind of basic mythology or rule is kind of getting very shaky. But I see it, you know, coming back again with all these neo things. Okay. Another thing which defines what an artwork is that it must be displayed in a museum or in a gallery. It must be displayed in a place where art is to be seen. You know. Therefore, you know when you pay your ticket to go in that you're going to see art. So you know, it's there, it's art. And just a good example of that is that if you have an alternative space, if you rent a warehouse or something, what do? You make big posters with art, you know, all over the place. So you kind of officialize the place, which is not a museum or a gallery. And if it gets even more complicated, what you do, you put the word art at the end. So then you have land art, environment art, performance art, video art, you know. So it's very important that you know you're going to see art so that you don't miss it. So you know, so you know, it's very important that you have these spaces. Now, beside that, a fourth component is that it must be placed in the room in a way that you can have contemplation, that you can have an experience with it. So, you know, basically it must be in the middle of a white wall. It must be in the center. You know, it mustn't be beside other things. It must be isolated. And, I mean, you just have to look in the museum, which for me it looks like a sanitarium for crazy people, you know, because you have white walls. All it's missing is the padded, you know, the padded thing with the buttons in it. But basically, you know, every sign of everyday life is removed from a museum. If you get a chair there, it's so super designed, you look at it and say, is this art or is this a chair? You know, you don't even know anymore. But, you know, but this is not just an accident. This is a rule. This is one of these conventions, you know, that you must create a thing that it's going to be valuable, you know. You go in a church, you know, already you're kind of amazed because it's so big and empty. I mean, maybe you could have a religious experience if you go into a plane warehouse, you know, in Giard and stuff like that. So, but that's how much it is important, this concept of putting things in the middle with nothing else around it, you know. Now, oh yeah, another one which is very, 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 very important is that an artwork must never be anonymous. You must always know something about the piece, which is why all land and environment and all this stuff kind of got a lot of problems, you know. You must, because you need, at least the society needs like a name, or needs a person, or a concept, or anything to be able to relate to what's in front of it, you know. So, if you go to any museum, you know, you can have the little name card beside it, and if they don't know who, you know, who made the artwork, then it's going to be called Mr. Anonymous. You know, and I've heard so many people say who made this painting, well, it's anonymous. You know, so that was the name. You know, and if they don't, you know, if they don't put that, then they're going to say, you know, School of Venetian Painting, 15th century, or this time, or you know, or painted in the copy of this style, or painted after of, or painted in the studio, you know. So there must always be a definition of who made the thing. It cannot be anonymous, That's very important. Just an example of that, in a kind of sad way, it's like today, collectors and stuff like that, they don't buy an artwork, they buy the name. It's like, get me 3 Picassos and 2 Rauschenberg and the French fries with that. It's like, it's like I have this blue sofa and, this wall this height, so, what can you get me, between Rauschenberg and Warhol? That's how much important the name is. Just the concept of a work, you have to put your signature. If not, it's not finished. But that's kind of past today, but still, depending on which milieu or which kind of sphere you vehiculate, the signature is still like one of the most important things. So that's how important it is. What I've so far, these kind of 5 things I've described, I wouldn't call them, well, they are a kind of system of aesthetic that we're stuck with, I feel. But for me, it has nothing to do with aesthetic. It has to do with our Western culture. So I want to relate it not to art, but I want to relate to the social context in which we exist. So when I'm doing this kind of lecture and talking about these different things, it's reflecting kind of the aspect this Western culture has in art, but basically I'm giving a description of this society also, how, I forget in the Bible, I think it's Thomas who said, I want to see the hole. If I don't see the hole in the hand, I won't believe you. So it's like the whole society is built on that. They built on very concrete things. An example of that is that, I've kind of mentioned a bit before, but any artwork must be officially baptized as art. So that's another very important component. You must know that you are going to see art, and that this way you are going to have an art experience, You cannot have an art experience unless you know that you're seeing an artwork. Now, where I see that coming from, in a way, is, and this, then I get a bit, again, outside the art discussion, not art discussion, but the specificity of art, is that how I see education, or how I see the schooling out there and stuff like that, is you don't go to school to learn what is right, but you go there to learn the truth. You go there to learn what is the truth. You don't go there to think. You're there to assimilate what they say is the truth. It's like you're giving this wooden game where you have square pegs and circle ones, and that's what is going to school is all about. You have your square peg and you have your square hole, and you have to learn to put it in there. If you put it in the round one, you're not being creative, you're being wrong, And in school, they teach you that it's very bad to be wrong. So they don't teach you that you should be right. They teach you not to be wrong. And they don't not only do that, but they also teach you that it's wrong to be wrong. So you spend your life making sure that you're going to be right, And that's how I see that, then your life is a slalom of not being right or doing what you want. Your life is being busy making sure you're not going to be wrong again, That's the way I see the education system. So you're not taught to trust in yourself, to think for yourself, but it's even the reverse, you're taught not to trust yourself, because you don't know any better, you're young. And why this is so important, and why, because that for me is kind of let's say my biggest, well, not for frustration, I want to know another word, but is that then if somebody is confronted with something which is stamped, approved art, and for which he doesn't feel anything, for which he doesn't, it's like, well, this doesn't move me, it doesn't do anything for me, then because of this education thing, he's generally going to tend to think that he is wrong and he's doing something bad, and that it's his fault if he doesn't understand, So instead of trusting his own feeling and his own impression, he sees this is a museum, this is art, so if it's art and it's a museum and I don't understand it, then I have a problem, I'm the one who don't understand this thing here. And a way I see it is that if you put me in front of a computer and you tell me make a program, I'm going to say, I don't know. But the story is going to end there because it's as simple as that. I don't know. But we have this preconceived idea or in education that to put somebody in front of a piece of art and he should understand. And if he doesn't understand, what I find happen most of the time, it's like they get angry or they get frustrated or they get all these kind of stupid things, So many times I get reaction like I invite somebody who's not in the art world to come to an opening and something like that. And the first thing she asks me is, well, how should I dress? So it's not busy about just enjoying yourself, but how should I dress? How should I talk? And for me, why it bugs me is because that for me is keeping away the accessibility. Is this having this? It creates this sphere of this world of artists being, amazing, abnormal people. Well, abnormal, they don't say it. They say it, but normally they say they're eccentric, or in some nice, polite world. I had this experience once. I was invited to share a dinner in a restaurant with a friend of a friend, and all these guys went to the Club Med, so these were the kind of people to go to the Club Med. Anyway, during the night we talk about everything, and then they find out I'm an artist. So there was this woman in front of me, and she starts to tell me that art is magical and it's beautiful and it's so exceptional and it's so, and I say, no, art is hard work, and it gives me headaches. And she says, no, you're unique, you're exceptional, you reach something beyond the boundaries, and I say, no, I work in my studio, sometimes I cannot sleep because I think too much, and, she says, no, you're so special. At one point I say, look, I'm the artist, listen to me, I'm speaking to you, so it's like, my God, I'm there and she's still not accepting me. All she wants to hear is her ideas about what art is supposed to be. Anyway, so to go on with this list two other points which I find very, very, very important, but they're very small, about what defines as an artwork and not an artwork is, first of all, an artwork must be useless. Because, if an artwork has a use, then it's not art anymore, Then it becomes design, or it becomes pottery, or it becomes something else, and that is still very strong, and I make a joke of it, but I find my joke is mostly, true. It's like if I go in front of something and I don't know what it is, I say, well, does it have a use? No, then it must be art, because basically art has no use. In the in the general way we think about art, things like that. But even this idea, you can see that in the last 10 years, that has slowly been changing, with Alexandri Bandini, the architecture. Anyway, there's in the last 10 years, there's a big, and then there was the Memphis movement, these designers. So it's like design is finally getting to be accepted as art. You know? So the fact that art has to be functionless is still strong, but it's slowly, you know, falling apart. But, you know, you can see that, for example, photography has finally reached almost the status of art. But art is basically this, photography is the victim of the same thing. You know, photography was just, it was not creative. It was just, it was useful. You know. The moment it was not useful anymore, because we had other things, and it became art. I mean, it was, for me, it was always something creative. I had no problem with that. But that's how society thinks. The same thing with textile and craft and all these soft art, I don't know how to call them. Things that have been kept away from mainstream art. Yeah. One last thing, which again reflects more of our society, is that art must be expensive. If something is cheap, you don't trust it. You know? It's like, it mustn't be an original. It must be a fake. It must be a copy. I don't want it. You know. So, I mean, that's an old joke. You know, it's like put $30 on it, nobody will buy it. Put $300 on it, somebody will have to buy it because wow, $300 must be damn good. You know. So now. Since I give you kind of this list of what did I say so far? You know, that first you must, you know, it's the act of contemplation, then it must have a visual body, then it must be in a gallery, it must be in a place like alone in the space. What else did I say? That it, yeah, you must have a name attached to it. Cannot be anonymous. That's a really good feedback. Like mine is there in big, you know. But I avoided putting it there, and people got confused. You know, is this 5 pieces or is this one installation? People get very scared about these things. But I figured there it's big enough for me for now. It's not so much about. What else did I say? It must be expensive, and it must be useless. So. Now, what I find scary at this point is that if you have all these conditions fulfilled, then you're going to have an artwork, and that's you know, that's a mathematical formula. That's, you know, 100% sure. But so far, there's no talk about the intention of the artist, the personality of the artist, the style, the emotions involved, the meaning involved. None of that. But if you follow this list, you have an artwork, and you will be having an art experience. You know? And that's why I say these mythologies are so strong, and they're so important, because that's what is defining what is an artwork, and not the feeling, and not the meaning, and not the relation you have to it. So, which reminds me of a nice story, about, actually 2 stories, which I like. One story is that when I was in Concordia in 80 or 81, we had group shows. So we had the space from the university allocated to us, and everybody could submit. And for one of the shows, what I did, I was wearing for the last 2 years kind of Japanese shoes, the flat one, which I liked. And so they got holes, dirty, you know, like really nice human wear out kind of feeling. So there was actually a podium like this, and I put them, the 2 shoes, bang, like that. And then I put a plexiglass glaze over them, you know. Neat, wow, it looks nice. And of course, it got accepted in the show. Okay, mind you, I like the shoes, and it kind of looks what I do today. But, you know, but people were really puzzled, like, what are these things? You know, are they made of ceramics? Are they all handmade, like made of fibers? Are they actually painted? Are they illusion, you know? But it's like just the context was so important. You know, I just basically said this was art. And there you go, this is art. I think Marcel Duchamp did the same thing, which is urinoir, taking the urinoir and putting it there. Or another guy I like is Yves Klein, who had this show which we call that he sensitized the room. So you got this gallery, he's got this show, and the show, there was nothing. It was totally empty, but he had an opening with wine and all these things. But because he said he had the show, and his name was there, then the space was sensitized, so that there was actually an artwork there. So, it's, and I think that kind of underlines the power of the frame and things like that. The other story I want to tell is kind of quite beside the point, but it's a funny one and a sad one in a way, I guess. And because it's another one of the hidden rules, which rises at another level, but is that if you're an artist, you cannot change style. That's illegal. The cops are going to come and pick you up. They're going to throw you out of museums. The stock market police is going to come and give you a nice little pat there. And if you don't react, then you'll just be even more precise. Which means you're not allowed to change style. You have to do the same thing over and over again, because that's a sign of maturity, that you know what you are doing. And it also means that you're a good investment, because what you do in 5 years will still look as what you did now, except of course it will be better, things like that. And if you're dead, that's even better. Anyway, and the thing about that is that there's this American artist I met. She's like 65 or something like that. Josh Bear, and she's a minimalist painter, or she used to be. And I met her in Amsterdam. Very nice woman, and she used to be known. And I know about Sol Lewitt and Donald Judd and these guys, but I have to say I never really came across her name, or I never looked more into minimalist object painting like that. Anyway, so she was doing that, and she was selling high money and stuff like that. And then she got sick of America, went to England, London, she lived there. Now she lives in Amsterdam. Now I think at some point she just totally abandoned minimal art. And she started to a kind of return to naturalistic, very, very soft, very kind of poetic, mystical kind of painting. Totally different, but also a very nice body of work. Now nobody wanted to touch her anymore. Even if she was big, nobody wanted to have anything to do with her. If she wanted money, she went and took out an old minimalist canvas and brought out on the market. Then she'd make $10,000 or $50,000 just like that. But no gallery would want anything to know about her today, what she's doing today. And the funny thing about it is that, okay, her name is Joe Bear, but her son is Josh Bear, who runs one of the big galleries of New York, and he doesn't want even to touch her work, So, thank you, son. And this is consequence of all these rules and things like that. So, now, to kind of round things off a bit, I started to talk about that I don't believe in objectivity, and that I believe in so that everybody's view of the world is equivalent, and that there's no objective truth out there that you can measure yourself with. And that you're, in that way, then when you are looking at something, your definition of that thing will be relative to the context in which you find yourself. So, meaning that whatever you see out there, how you will see it will be dependent on what you have in your head. So if you say this thing, if you in your head you have this idea of what an artwork is, then only an artwork will be which fits into what it is in your head, things like that. So that for me then, the way, not the way we have to go, I don't like this way of saying that, but for me the way we have to think is that we have, first of all, to be aware of all these rules, these things that affect us in our private life and as artists in our commercial life, or in the sense, not commercial, but in the sense of gallery life or museum life, or the one we bring our little babies to the outside world. I know when a few times I've sold something, it always breaks a bit my heart. One of the little babies is grown and goes away. But if I don't believe in this one rule, if I believe that everybody is kind of equal in his understanding, in his view of the world, and if I believe that my view of the world is totally dependent on the context, on what I feel and what is happening outside, then I see that any understanding, any stability, any search for meaning, and I talked about that last week, will be not accepting any longer as truths what we are offered by the outside world, by this society in which we function. But I find the only route is one of understanding and one of appreciation of what is in front of you, and then trusting your instincts from that point. So it's really a kind of not a return, but to communicate at a level of instincts and of trusting your own experience, as opposed to framing your experience in notions that already exist. So for me the search for meaning, or the search for understanding, that is not in the artwork out there or the things out there, but in the relation we establish with these things. And another way, as I say it, is that artworks or things out there are no longer a thing out there, but it's a relationship, it's an environment, it's something in which we participate. It's very hard to describe something which is kind of just a relationship, but basically, to get away from these mythologies of art, these concerns, for me, then we have to go and to create an understanding of art as a relationship, as a situation between me and the thing out there. And the way I kind of say it is to find meaning in art, or to have an experience in art, is the same way that one tries to find love between a mother and a child, or in the same way that you try to find consciousness within the brain, and which is not like that. It's just a relationship, it's just a thing between them. And in that sense, I would talk about art as something which is more than the sum of its parts. It's not the thing out there, and it's not the thing me here, but it's actually my relationship in it. And why for me it's important to point out these rules and these mythologies is to give room for these feelings to come back again, as opposed to just using the system that is given to us. Anyway, that's it. So, thank you very much. And I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to add or anything to say. Well, I hope you sleep well. I will. Thank you very much for coming. There's more coffee. It's a bit cold, but you're more than welcome to it.